morning, 5:37. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. How are you all doing? Today, I'm going to talk to you about failure tolerance. Yes, your ability to tolerate that thing which, let's face it, most of us would really rather avoid. And if you are someone who suffers from imposter syndrome, then avoiding failure and everything that goes with that, the feeling that there's the risk that then if you fail, you're going to be exposed, that is going to, of course, be your highest priority. But in this life, I've got news for you. What I want to convince you of is how important failure is for your ongoing, not just growth as a person, as a professional, but for your ongoing success. Before I get stuck in, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Caroline Flanagan. I am the coach for lawyers with imposter syndrome. I help you stop overthinking, stop overworking, and start getting more of the recognition that you deserve, that you know deep down you deserve more of, that I know as a fellow imposter syndrome sufferer that you're not getting as much of the recognition as you should. And I'm here to help you with that. So let's talk about failure tolerance then. Let's start first of all with a definition. What do I mean by it? So there's two parts to failure tolerance for me. The first one is your willingness to embrace your preparedness to fail in order to grow. So the best example I can give of that is something you want to get better at, and you know, as is so often the case, that the way to get better at it is to just keep doing it. So you don't just do it first time and you're already excellent at it. You know you're going to need to keep do it a number of times and get better and better. Perfect example of this, from my point of view, also very relevant for you if you are working in a law firm, if it's the opportunity for you to deliver presentations, is wow, that's standing up and talking in front of a crowd, whether it's colleagues, whether it's clients. That's something most people find quite terrifying, but it's something that you can only get better at by doing it over and over again. And what that inevitably entails, of course, is a few failures along the way. Things are going to go wrong. You're going to feel uncomfortable. Things are going to happen that you never imagined happened. Take it from me as a keynote speaker of like 10 years. All the things come up in that journey to becoming an expert at speaking publicly and openly. So the first definition of failure then is that willingness to like almost welcome failure as a means for growth and to become an expert at something. The second part of failure tolerance is your ability to accept failure when it does happen. That could be failure that you have willingly embraced in the case of the speaking, as the example I've just given you. It could also be failure that happens to you that's unexpected, that wasn't planned, that you didn't want. So failure tolerance then is also your ability to, when failure does happen, as it will, because it happens to all of us, your ability to accept that failure and use it again as an opportunity to learn and to progress. So that's the definition of failure tolerance. Why bring it to you today? Why in particular bring it as a topic for you if you suffer from imposter syndrome? Well, look, failure is integral. It's an essential part of success. That's what makes it so very, very important. You can't possibly expect to succeed to your highest level if you're not prepared to encounter failure. How I know this is because if what you're doing is you're 100% focused on avoiding failure, all you will do are the things you know how to do already, the things you feel 100% confident you're not going to fail at. And as long as you're only doing what you already know how to do, you're never going to grow to that next level. You're never going to achieve another level of success. So somehow being able to branch out, to dare yourself to step beyond, we talk about stepping into the beyond your comfort zone, and it is that. Stepping beyond what is comfortable to you, what you know how to do, into that zone where failure is not just possible, but likely, is the only way that you can properly grow and succeed. So the reason why it's so integral to success is because it's how you learn. Okay, so nothing teaches us nearly as effectively as the things that we fail at. My son has got some exams coming up, my 10-year-old Max, bless him, he's not very excited about it at all. So we're looking at some practice papers, we're helping him with some questions that he finds difficult. And as I remind him, we need to do that practice in order to find out what he's not good at. We find out what he's currently failing at, and that's the opportunity to learn. That's how he's going to have the most growth. Failure is a stepping stone to success. There are so many examples of the greats who achieve success after so many failures. And it's not a cliche. It sounds like it. We hear it, these stories bandied around so much, but it actually is so important that we can recognize still the truth of those stories. So Thomas Edison being the classic example, the discovery of the light bulb, and he talks about the fact that he failed hundreds, thousands of times to create the light bulb until the moment when he created it. Meaning there were so many different iterations, so many different failures that were required. And it was the failures that enabled him to succeed. It was the same for him, and it is the same absolutely for you. One last point I want to make about why I'm talking about failure tolerance, why it's so important. It's not just about you being able to reach that next level. It's not just about it being a stepping stone to success. It's also about what it means for you as a person, like how you develop as a person when you've experienced failure, when you've learned to tolerate failure. It makes you a very different person to the person who's only ever known success. If you can relate to failure, if you can tolerate failure, you are much more relatable and you can relate to others. It's a human condition. We all experience it. It's very unnatural never to experience failure, right? So it makes you relatable. It gives you a sense of humility also, right? A sense that you're not infallible. The fact that you are also human, again, makes you incredibly relatable. But also that going through the discomfort of failing something, what it requires of you to bounce back from that, what you learn from that, the resilience that builds, makes you a completely different person, a different caliber of person going out into the world, tackling new challenges, going on to greater success than if all you had ever experienced was just the doors opening for you the whole time, success after success. So I guess I kind of want to sell you on failure and it being appealing and being attractive because what of the many things that it can do for you. Now, I know for a fact if you suffer from imposter syndrome, this is not going to be music to your ears. For those of you who need reminding, imposter syndrome in its classic form is that feeling that you are a fraud. It's the feeling that your success is down to luck and that fear of being exposed. Any minute now, somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder and expose you as a fraud. So the idea of like embracing, leaning into failure is going to feel very unnatural, very uncomfortable for you. And that's why specifically I want to tackle it in this live session to give you a strategy to help you take baby steps towards embracing failure and help you build that failure tolerance. Now, here are the mistakes that I see, well, my clients make. And by the way, I used to make all the time when it comes to failure. The most obvious one, of course, is thinking that you cannot afford to fail, like that everything about how other people see you, how they respect you, like your whole identity is caught up in the fact that you can never fail. So think about this. You may not wake up every day and think, oh, I can't fail today. Some of you might, actually. If your imposter syndrome is really acute, you might. But the way you're going about your day, the way you're approaching your work is with such a high level of perfectionism that you're requiring of yourself, with so much pressure on yourself, such enormous fear to get everything right, that effectively is you being caught up in this total trap of like, I can't possibly do anything other than be perfect. I can't possibly risk failure because that will change what everything that everybody thinks about me. And it's that exposing you as a fraud, isn't it? If you've got imposter syndrome, it's that fear. But here's the other thing, and it's connected to the first issue. If you're a lawyer, as most of my clients are, all of my clients are, as most of you listening to this may well be, one of the things I see you do is you use the incredibly high standards that are required of you. You use that as, I'm going to say, as an excuse not to tolerate failure. Here's what I mean by that. The fact that you are advising your clients, you are doing very high level work, there's a lot at stake, obviously indicates that you want to get it right. You need to get it right for your client, and also that there are consequences for your client, for your firm, if you make mistakes. Now, this helps me to create a very clear distinction between something that might lead to negligence, which is like doing your job incorrectly, and that type of failure, and the type of failure I'm talking about today, which is the failure that enables you to grow. So what happens is, and what's very common, is you take the idea that, well, I work in a high level profession, we can't afford to make mistakes, there's too much at stake, and you beat yourself up with that. What it means is then when it comes to, for example, you being in a meeting and needing to speak up, because that's what as a lawyer you're required to do, because that's what your clients are paying for, your opinion, your contribution. And it's also, as you will know, in order to succeed, in order to progress up the career ladder, you need to be present, you need to be vocal in those meetings. But what your brain will do is say, I work in a high level profession where mistakes are not allowed, therefore I'm not going to say anything in a meeting because I might make a mistake. Now, what I want to encourage you to do is be willing to speak up in a meeting and say things in a way that's less than perfect. Be willing to speak up in a meeting and actually get something wrong, in the sense that not this is my advice to the client and you risk getting that wrong, but there's so many ways in which you can and should be contributing to a meeting where you can afford to do it imperfectly, where you can throw out an opinion and somebody perhaps not agree with you, or that opinion not be taken on board. Now, in your mind, and when you're in that scenario, that's going to feel like failure. And what I want to say to you is that's the kind of failure that is not only okay, but I want you to embrace. Why? Because coming back to what failure does and why failure tolerance is really important is because the only way you're going to get good at speaking up in meetings, the only way you're going to get good at expressing your opinion, the only way you're going to get good at articulating a difficult point is by doing it, is by risking that failure of getting it wrong the first time, of saying it clumsily, of saying it carelessly. Yeah. Now, many of you, if you're listening to this, are going to be freaking out about the idea of risking failure in a meeting in front of a client. And what I want to suggest to you is, if you've never spoken up in a meeting like that before, then start speaking up internally. Start small, start with your peers, then start with your team. But the point is, it's always going to feel scary. You're always going to be afraid of getting it wrong or saying it incorrectly. But failure is the only way you will learn. It is the quickest way to learn. It is the stepping stone to success, to doing it well. So don't make the mistake of thinking that the high standards that are required of you, of your firm as a lawyer in advising your clients, is the same, or it's the same requirement as a skill you need to learn, such as speaking up, such as delivering a presentation. You need to be willing to fail at doing that. I'm smiling because I know how hard I found it. I'd say, well, probably for my whole career, until I discovered this work, until I really understood my imposter syndrome and how to turn it around. I was obsessed with not failing. I felt always everything I did, not just the advice I gave as a lawyer in the city, but every interaction had to be perfect, had to meet this like impossibly high standard in everything I did. And the idea of learning by doing was like completely like crazy to me. I couldn't afford to do that. Now, learning by doing is one of my mantras. It's one of the things I coach myself to do all of the time. I'm sitting here doing a live, going live to LinkedIn, live to Facebook, live to YouTube on a Monday evening. And I did not go to live school, right? I did not go to a school that involved like setting up the tech and doing the lighting and making my notes available to me easily, looking the camera. I am doing this. I'm learning by doing. It's a skill that I have built, and I've been doing it quite a lot of time, done it quite a lot now. I'm getting better at it because I've been having these little fails on the way, and I will continue to have fails on the way. But every time I do, I know that I'm getting better, which is why I'm incredibly tolerant of any failure that I have. Likewise with the podcast, if you listen to the Caroline Flanagan podcasts, oh my gosh, the early episodes, I've deliberately left them the way they are. So you can almost go back and listen to some of those first episodes and hear how nervous I was, how stumbling I was. And now, episode 112, over 100 episodes later, I'm so much better at doing podcasts. So, presenting live, giving a presentation in person, doing a podcast, in your case, speaking up at a meeting, for example. These are all skills that you need to learn by doing. It's not the letter of the law, which you have to get right, and it's very important that you do. They are skills in the way you deliver the service that you provide. So hopefully that's really clear. Don't let the standards of your industry prevent you from learning by doing. So the problem, of course, then is the way this fear of failure, the effect it's having on you as long as you let that fear dictate what you do. And that problem is, in a nutshell, you play small. Yeah. Remember I said the only way to learn really is to fail. It's an essential part of your growth. So if all you're doing is focusing on not failing, then guess what? Three things are going to happen. You're going to be caught up in a lot of thought drama. I call it overthinking. So it's all the thinking where you are losing huge amounts of time in your day, in your working life, just worrying about getting things wrong, just feeling stressed about not knowing how to do something perfectly, and then beating yourself up for not doing it. All the time you spend thinking about an opportunity that comes up that you know it's right and you should be seizing, and you would learn so much from that opportunity if only you were willing to fail or accept that you might fail, right? But you're so busy avoiding that failure that you just keep yourself small, completely small, and you're caught up in that overthinking. The second consequence of you avoiding failure is overworking. I've talked about perfectionism, of course, like the fact that you'll keep going. I don't want to fail. I don't want to get anything wrong. It doesn't matter about the task. Everything has to be perfect. Of course, you are going to overwork. And as long as you're overworking, you're not performing at your highest level. You're too busy being driven by the fear of being exposed, the fear of failing, to actually show up as the incredibly unique and capable person you are. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Third consequence of you avoiding failure is, as I said at the beginning, not getting the recognition that you deserve. A lot of avoiding failure is just avoiding being visible, avoiding the speaking up, right? Avoiding being in the spotlight. As long as you're doing that, people aren't seeing you. People don't realize quite how much you're working, how hard you're working, quite how much you're contributing. Why? Because, well, honestly, everybody's got their own stuff going on. And while it is lovely to think that you might have a boss or peers or clients that are acknowledging and seeing every single thing you're doing and really appreciating how hard you're working, honestly, half of the time, they're not noticing. It's your job to make these things more visible. And I talked about this last week about getting the recognition that you deserve, how it's your responsibility to go out and get that by being visible, by presenting how valuable you are to the outside world, to your clients, to your peers, to your boss. So it's a problem. What we don't want is you making decisions or working from a place of, I'll do anything just to avoid failure. So what do we do then? What do we do about it instead? The answer is to build your failure tolerance. And I call it failure tolerance because it's never going to be nice. It's never going to be something you go out and go, oh, I think I'm going to fail today. Although I say that, I actually have days sometimes where I'm really heavily into my imposter speech and I'm like, right, I want to get to this next goal, and I know the quickest way there is through failure. How many fails am I prepared to do to get to that goal? And that's a question that actually my coach used to ask me all the time. How many times are you prepared to fail in order to succeed at a particular goal? And I love that idea. How many times would you be prepared to fail at going for a promotion? I think you can probably hear the screaming in the background. My kids are home. My boys are doing their thing after schools. Hopefully it's not interrupting and interfering with your enjoyment of this video. So we want to build your failure tolerance so that you stop having to avoid failure and you can make kind of intelligent, calculated risks, right? Take calculated risks about what you're willing to fail at so that you're able to say, do you know what? 2022 is going to be the year that I become incredibly confident speaking out loud to a room full of people, whether that's in a meeting, whether that's you in the spotlight giving a training or doing a presentation or doing a pitch. You could totally decide to just make that your objective next year. And then behind that, in order to drive that, decide, right, I am going to build my tolerance by failing at this over and over again. How does that sound? Does that completely fill you with dread? Is it something that like you think I could never do that? Or is there a way in which you'd be willing to say, do you know what, I'm going to fail at this 10 times and then I'm going to see where I am after 10 times and see and evaluate how much I've grown, what I've learned from those failures. Okay, so how do we build it? How do we build your failure tolerance? The first thing I want you to do, and this is always the case, if you are someone who suffers from imposter syndrome, or even if it's, I don't know, I put imposter syndrome on the same spectrum as just a moment of self-doubt, is let's first of all understand just what's going on. You are literally having a moment of self-doubt. I think one of the dangers sometimes is we feel like we're fraud and we think our success is down to luck and all of those feelings will come up, or the feelings of self-doubt, and we think that's just who we are. And we think like that's just how we always feel. And one of the things I want to encourage you to do is recognize like the moment in which your imposter syndrome is triggered. Okay, so that's the first thing I want you to do is start to notice, I can feel my imposter syndrome coming up. How you notice that is either through those thoughts, very specific thoughts, I feel like a fraud, or in my case, it's often a very physical feeling, right? Very visceral feeling of like knots of anxiety in my stomach. I want to avoid things. Also the way you behave, right? So that avoidance or that procrastination or that like being in this sort of intense like need to make something perfect. So notice when your imposter syndrome has been triggered. That's the first thing. And notice that it's a moment. And then what happens is this, you automatically, because, well, I'm guessing if you haven't already been following my work and put it into practice and you're already further along, your natural response is to make that mean something about you. And specifically, you make it mean that you're not enough in some way. Now, that might not be a conscious thought in your head, I'm not enough. But so long as you're sitting there feeling daunted, feeling afraid to speak up, feeling that you can't submit a piece of work unless it's 100% perfect, then underneath those feelings, those thoughts, is your imposter syndrome and you making it mean you are not enough. So how we solve that then, what I want you to do in those moments when your imposter syndrome is triggered and what's going on is this feeling that you're not enough, and that's how you're showing up, right? So as long as that feeling's in your brain and that's the energy in your body, then you are showing up to whatever task you're doing, or if you're sitting in that meeting, what you're presenting is someone who is not enough. You're showing up from a place of inadequacy, uncertainty, self-doubt. I like to compare it. I think a great analogy is the thought of the ground that you're standing on. If you allow your imposter syndrome to make it mean you're not enough, then that ground beneath you starts to shift. It feels very unstable. It feels like it could fall away at any moment. Very hard to present your best work, deliver your most articulate sentence, speak to the point, focus on what the client needs or what the discussion is. Very hard to do all of that when the ground beneath you is shifting and wobbling and feels like it's going to fall away all the time. I think that's a great analogy, or for like I was going to say metaphor analogy because I've been doing my English homework with my son. A great example of how it feels when your imposter syndrome has been triggered. So what I want to tell you is the solution is, instead of showing up as who you're not, so on that very insecure ground, you show up as who you are. So what you do is you take steps, and I'll talk about those steps in a second, to firm up that ground, to make that ground beneath you incredibly solid. So what that then enables you to do is you don't have to worry about your footing. You know, you feel grounded, you can feel calm, you can feel under control because the ground beneath you is solid. So the answer then to building your failure tolerance is, in the moment when you feel at risk of failure and your imposter syndrome is triggered, you stop, you consciously recognize you are showing up as who you're not on this unstable ground, and you switch to showing up as who you are from this much more solid ground, stable foundation. That's the solution. Stop showing up as who you are, stop showing up as who you're not, start showing up as who you are. And how on earth do you do that? It's simple. That solid ground, that who you are, is the person who has 100% belief in how unique you are, how capable you are, and how you are someone who can create results. The unique bit you get, and I can talk about in more detail another time. The capable bit you understand from the point of view of capable. That piece about being someone who can create results is, I think, some of the most important work I do with my clients. We all think that things happen to us. We think that maybe we can contribute perhaps 20% to something, maybe 40% of our effort, but then we need all of these other conditions and circumstances to be right in order to get a particular result. One of the things I want to teach you is that you are someone who can create your results. You be the one in charge of that. I have a client, an amazing client, who's just been promoted to partner. I am still in the afterglow of her news. I am so incredibly proud of her. And one of the most powerful things that she has learned from working with me is that she is the one to create the result of her promotion. Not as she felt before, that, oh, she needs to do this, this, and this, but then it depends on X, it depends on Y, and then this needs to happen, and all of that. Basically, powerlessness, which so many of you are going through the world feeling that things are not up to you, things are not within your control to create. And one of the things I want to teach you is that you are unique, you are capable, and you are someone who can create results. So therefore, back to that solid foundation which I am here to teach you to build, is one of 100% belief that you are unique, you are capable, you are valuable, and you are someone who can create your own results. How on earth can I do that if you are someone with imposter syndrome? The answer is by helping you to build and to use and to commit to and embody your imposter speech. For those of you who are new to my work, the imposter speech is a tool that I created. Specifically, I actually created the tool out of a strategy I had been using on myself to turn my imposter syndrome into a strength, by which I mean when my imposter syndrome is triggered, it becomes an opportunity for me to remember who I am. Remember, I am unique, I am capable, I am valuable, and I can create any result that I want. That's what my imposter speech does for me, and it's what your imposter speech can do for you. So the imposter speech then is it's the tool that you use to build 100% belief in you. And when you have that tool and you practice and you use that tool and you start to embody that belief, it means you can speak up in a meeting when you don't feel confident. You can brave risk failure in order to learn, in order to grow, in order to take that next stepping stone towards success. You can do all of those things that are essential for your success, your growth, knowing from a place of 100% belief in you. And when you do that, not only how you show up is completely different, the ground, remember, is firm, it's safe. You feel grounded, you feel calm, you feel in control. Just imagine for a minute, using that example of speaking up in a meeting. If the ground beneath your feet is that solid, you have that belief in you, how much more like headspace and energy do you have to give to your clients? Do you have to give to the conversation that's happening in that moment? How much more available are you for your ideas, for your experience to come to the surface when you need it? We've all had that experience of leaving a meeting and feeling really frustrated because, oh, we should have said something, but it didn't come to us in that time. When you have that grounding, that safe feeling of safety because you have 100% belief in who you are and you show up from that solid ground, you can risk speaking up in a meeting. And not only will you be able to tolerate any failure that comes as a result of that, you will also actually, ironically, be less likely to fail because how you're showing up is from such a strong and solid and more confident position. So your imposter speech is the answer. It's the powerful, portable, personal, practical tool that I created to help you build 100% belief in who you are. And it does so on 3 levels. First of all, the process of creating a speech is what reveals to you how unique you are, how valuable you are, how you can create any result you want. Then the practice of it in these moments when you're in a meeting, you're afraid of failure, practicing using it to give you the solid ground, to stabilize the ground beneath your feet, absolutely helps you to become not just better at it, but actually when you see the results that practicing using it creates, that starts to build your confidence in your ability to, in any situation, when your imposter syndrome is triggered, use your speech and know you can turn to that and be able to create, like in that moment, be able to turn to that and be able to create the result you want, which is to speak in the meeting, right? And then thirdly, just a commitment to always having your speech with you, to using it in as many different circumstances and continuing to use it ongoing. That is when it suddenly starts to become part of you. And for those of you who are thinking this sounds like really hard work, that point when it just becomes who you are, there's no work involved in that at all. Imposter syndrome is triggered. Imposter speech, just saying your name, triggers the effect of your imposter speech, that 100% belief. So I know a lot in there, a lot of detail around how you can build your failure tolerance. So how you build it is, of course, with your imposter speech, which helps you build that 100% belief in who you are so that you can go out and take risks and know that when that failure happens, it has no impact on your identity. The ground beneath your feet is solid, it's firm, you can be calm, you can feel grounded. But what can you go out and do today? Like today. It's this evening. What can you go out and do tomorrow immediately to start putting this work into effect? What I want to suggest you do is just begin by noticing. Noticing, make a note of even, as you're going through your working day, the things you avoid doing because you're afraid of the failure. The email you don't write because you are worried that it will be some form of failure, how it's received, how it might sound, what other people will think. The opportunity that flashes up in your inbox, which you don't take because you don't feel you're 100% sure you could take up that opportunity or succeed at it, right? The fear of maybe failing puts you off actually seizing that opportunity. So I just want you to notice the times, the opportunities that you have to fail and to grow and which you are not taking. That's it from me this evening. Thank you so much. That ended up being quite a long live, 35 minutes. A real pleasure talking to you about failure tolerance. If you would like to continue this conversation, please come over and join the Facebook group. It's the Imposter Syndrome group on Facebook. Let's carry on this conversation. Before I close, I see there's a comment that's come up, so I want to just have a look at that. Love how your posts are always relatable to those like me, even outside of the law industry too. Absolutely. Look, imposter syndrome is imposter syndrome. Very applicable, very relatable to many of you out there. So I'm so glad that even if you're not a lawyer with imposter syndrome, I'm so glad to hear that some of you are finding it useful. The comment here says, it can be so frustrating not being able to reduce emotions quick enough in order to deal with things. Oh, wow, that's such a great way of describing what you want to happen in any given moment when your imposter syndrome is triggered, actually. That reducing the emotions, calming them down. That's why you need a tool. That's why, certainly for me, and I would offer, and all of this, the work of creating your imposter speech is totally available on the podcast, in the Facebook group. You can access this stuff for free. But the point is having that tool, to that speech to say in the moment when your emotions are triggered, is exactly how you can reduce them quickly. So thank you very much for that comment. It finishes by saying you can't force these things, and we can all eventually recognize the positives in a failed circumstance. Listen, there are so many positives, but what I want to encourage you is to do the work now of building your failure tolerance so that you are prepared for those inevitable failures that await you. Not just because we're human and no one's perfect, but because I want you to grow. I want you to continue to succeed. And an essential way of doing that is through failure. So I wish you all rather lots of failures that enable you to grow. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. I'll be back next week I'll be talking about the Sunday night blues. That's something that came up in one of my client sessions. So hopefully I will see you then. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye for now.